we'll get started. So thank you for logging in and joining us today. My name is Scott Douglas. I am the director of the Hahn Horticulture Garden here in Blacksburg, Virginia. Today we're heading over to Richmond to visit Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden. Just a couple things before we get started. Make sure that your microphone is muted and your video is turned off just to reduce the bandwidth that we're using. Those buttons are in the bottom left corner of your screen and should have a red line through them when you turn them off. And you can also make sure you're on speaker view. In the top right corner, you should be able to select view and then make sure you're on speaker view. Brian will be sharing his screen and have a PowerPoint presentation that goes with his talk. If you have any questions, just use the chat box to type them in there and I will read through those at the end. Or if I see something that we can interject with, I'll do that as well. Today's guest is Brian Trader. He is the president and CEO of Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden. He's also a Hokie alumni and a great supporter of our horticulture students. I'm not going to go into too much detail about Brian and his background. I'll let him do that. So now I'll hand the virtual microphone over to you, Brian. Thanks for doing this today.
Thank you, Scott. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. Well, Scott, thank you so much for the invitation to join the group today and share a little bit about Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden. I'm relatively new to the garden. I arrived here in the beginning of January, and prior to that, I helped open one of the country's newest botanical gardens, Delaware Botanic Gardens, which is located at the beaches of Delaware. And prior to that, I was at Longwood Gardens, where I served as the director of domestic and international studies for about a decade. And simultaneously, when Dr. Bob Lyons retired, I took over his role on an interim basis as the director of the Longwood graduate program. And I did that for about 4.5 years. So for a while, I had 2 positions there at Longwood. I'm a triple Hokie, so I did all my education there in Blacksburg. So for all the colleagues that are joining us from Radford and Christiansburg and Blacksburg, I called that region home for almost 10 years. So I got my bachelor's in horticulture there, and I changed departments for my master's where I got my weed science, and then went back to horticulture where I got my PhD. So I spent many evenings, many days learning in the Hahn Horticultural Garden, and of course learning on the Virginia Tech campus. So Scott, it's a pleasure to visit with the group today, and thank you again for having me. Scott asked that I just give a little update on what's new at Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden. And this image was taken just a week ago. Believe it or not, before we had these warm temperatures here in the region, our tulip display this year has lasted longer than almost any other year. So we've gotten multiple weeks of great color out of our tulips. And we're going to advance the slide, or try to advance the slide. So for the
but the person that I would recommend, and she's the top person, is Mary Catherine.
Sorry about that. I think we had a little bit of some bleed in from a guest. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden, our mission is to connect people with plants to improve communities. And of course, the story of this past year has truly been the pandemic. And so we've been, we had to close the gardens for 4 months. The gardens experienced a significant reduction in force. So we had, for a period of time last year.
I'm going to unmute, and then I'm going
to. For a period of time last year, we had to unfortunately lay off about 80% of our staff because the gardens were not open. So we're starting to recover. And of course, with the reduction and some of the mandates by the current governor, we're excited by where we can go in the future. And I'm trying to advance my slide and it's not working. So this image was taken just when the cherries were in blossom just a few weeks ago. We're at a point now where we have reduced a lot of our capacity limits. So now we're a little bit more open than we were before for guests to come and enjoy. We're open from 10 to 5 right now, but that'll change on Friday when we open our hours from 9 to 5. This gives you a snapshot of what our year looked like last year. So you'll see there's 3 circles that are highlighted. One is the number of guests that we engaged last year. So last year we had about 175,000 guests. And that's down a considerable amount. In 2019, we had over 400 and close to 500,000 guests. So, being closed for 4 months, but also the limitations that we had under the governor's mandate really affected how many people we could engage into the gardens. Prior to the pandemic in 2019, we had 113 staff, and right now we're around 84. So as of the end of 2020, we were at 68, but we're hiring right now. So if you know anybody that's looking for a role and would do great in a public garden, please let us know. Members, we have about 13,000 households now. So we're starting to see memberships really pick up and improve in the garden. So what's new? What to expect in 2021? And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the Plant Fest, M&T Bank Restore, and some of the others. So this weekend on Friday and this Saturday, our garden is going to host our Plant Fest. And that's where we have over 40 vendors that come in from throughout the region. Sorry about that. We have about 40 vendors that come in throughout the region, and they have plants for sale. They have garden ornaments for sale, gloves, anything you can imagine that's relevant to gardening. So on April 30th, that Plant Fest will start at 9 a.m. and end at 5. And then on May 1st, which is this Saturday, that'll have a 9 a.m. start and a 3 p.m. Close. So everyone's welcome to come. You don't have to buy garden admission to participate. Another thing we're doing right now is M&T Bank Restore. And this is our exhibit for this year. And what we're doing is we're really celebrating the healing power of nature. After the last year that we've all gone through, we know how important it is to get outside, to be amongst gardens, to be amongst plants, and to celebrate nature. And so this year, rather than bringing in any large exhibit or celebrating anything fancy in the garden, we're letting the gardens do all the speaking, and we're letting the gardens steal the show. And so we're inviting guests in to be one with nature, to celebrate gardens. And as a part of that, we've partnered with 2 different local artists to do an artist in residence for the first part of the summer. So Eunicia Buster here and then Alfonso Perez are 2 artists that celebrate textiles, paint, art, drawing. And what we've had them do is Eunicia Buster, for instance, walks through the garden almost on a daily basis. And she's using our plants to engage our visitors and to engage our guests, but also to extend that healing power of nature. We're really excited to have these aspiring artists in the garden on a daily basis. And so that'll be running through June. And then we're going to identify additional artists to celebrate nature and to amplify the gardens and the healing power of our gardens. Another thing that we're going to be doing coming up next month, May 5th, is Celebrations of Bloom. And so I'm not sure how many of you have ever attended a party or a wedding in the garden, but on our 50 some acres that are accessible to the guests, we have some beautiful, beautiful venues. And so we're highlighting those venues for wedding venues, for corporate venues. And on May 5th, from 5:30 to 8 p.m., we're inviting our guests to come in and to learn a little bit more about some of our rates, how you can host celebrations of life, weddings in the garden, and really just showcasing the different venues. So this is our rose garden. It's probably one of our most coveted areas for guests to enjoy. This is our Flagler Garden, which is truly stunning right now, but it's also equally as beautiful in the autumn. And what we're doing is we're talking about our garden as a garden of love. And that really goes back to the healing power of nature and our theme this year with M&T Bank Restore. Also, sorry about the slide transitions here. I'm trying to stop them, but I can't. So another venue that we're excited about this year is Flowers After 5. And so each Thursday, what we're doing is we're opening up the gardens late for our guests to enjoy. And so from 5 until about 8:30, we have live music in the gardens at different points of the gardens for people to enjoy. A lot of different variety of live music that's being presented. There's an opportunity to enjoy refreshments, drinks in the garden. We're doing it safely. We're doing it socially distanced. But we're just trying to be accessible to our community a little bit later in the evening. And so we realize that the traditional family that are working 9 to 5 and that they're busy on the weekends, they don't really have access to the gardens. So we're trying to make sure that we're accessible to all of our community members at different points of the week. And so Flowers After 5 has been very successful for that. And of course, in the summer months, when it's a little bit warm, after 5 might be the best time to enjoy the garden. So that starts in June and that runs through September. Another thing that I'm really excited about is the Lewis Ginter Nature Reserve. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that, but back in 2012, the Gardens was very fortunate to receive a call and interest from a family who had a farm out in Hanover County. So it's about a 30-minute drive from Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden, the garden itself. And the name of this family is the Cosby family. And over about 30 years, the Cosby family transformed an 80-acre farm into this oasis of azaleas and rhododendrons. And so this shot was taken just last week of that farm. And I'm going to go back one slide so you can see. Pictured in this image is John Morse. He's our director of horticulture, and he's pictured with Elizabeth Cosby, who's in her 90s and on a daily basis goes out and tends to these beautiful azaleas. And this is one of her favorite azaleas. So we had a picture taken next to her. But in 2015, the Cosby family gave their 80-acre farm to Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden. And so while we have the deed to the farm, the Cosbys are still living on that property. They're still adding to those collections, and they're currently still taking care of the gardens. And as you can see, they're doing a great job of it. And so if and when something happens to the Cosby family, it's Elizabeth Cosby and her brother, Father Roy. This property will come under the Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden umbrella, and we will use this as a site for education, for training, and we hope to get those collections of azaleas and rhododendrons accredited. So we're very excited for that. So a couple other highlights that the gardens are doing. We're looking at a capital campaign for a garden expansion. And so prior to starting this presentation, I was speaking with Scott about the master plan for the Hahn Horticulture Garden and the interest to build a greenhouse so you can feature some tropicals for the guests there. Well, we have a pretty significant conservatory here at the garden already, and we're looking to do a garden expansion of that conservatory. So we're going to hopefully double the size of the conservatory, and in the process extend the garden experience for our guests. So when you pay to come to the gardens right now, we have about 56 acres that are available for you to visit. But in the future, we're hoping that you'll have access to an additional 30 acres, which is the total property. So that garden expansion includes doubling the conservatory, adding a new meadow, adding access to our second irrigation lake, implementing some best management practices around that lake, and then the construction of what we're calling a learning village. So how we engage learners of all ages in the garden. And so that's another thing that we're looking at, is how we're accessible and relevant to our community. So one of the gardens that we currently have is the Kroger Community Kitchen Garden. And in this garden, we grow a lot of fresh produce for nonprofits like Feed More, food banks, and we even have a program that we're working with some organizations that support migrants who've come into the country, and they have their own raised beds here in the garden to grow their own fruits and vegetables. Another thing that we're doing and we're featuring is the Museums for All program. We realize that $14, $15 is out of reach for some of our community here in Richmond. We want to ensure that we're sharing our garden with everyone. So we've partnered with the Institute of Museum and Library Services for this Museums for All program, which means that participants of this program get easy access to the gardens relatively at low cost. This past year, we are very honored to be recognized by USA Today as the #4 best botanical garden light display in the country. And so we're very fortunate to our partners at Dominion Energy to support our Garden Fest. This past year, of course, we didn't have as many guests enjoy this because of our limited capacity. But nonetheless, we were recognized as the #4 garden in the country for our holiday lights. So we're going to be bringing that back, and we're going to be amplifying that. And keep in mind, I came from Longwood Gardens, which is currently #1 in the country for light display. So I have a lot of ideas that we can share and new things we can implement this coming year. One of the things that we're always doing is we're trying to be innovative and creative. And this year we had to, because not many of our guests could get to the garden. So we had to leverage our ability to reach them virtually. So we had virtual story time, we had virtual garden tours. A lot of our continuing and adult education classes went virtual. And we see that as something that's going to continue. We enjoyed the opportunity to reach new audiences and to reach people all over the country and around the world. And so while we slowly bring some of our programming back online in person, we're even more excited how we can amplify what we've learned this past year through COVID to do more online symposia, more virtual storytelling, and use our website and social media to increase the access of the gardens to all. So something to look forward to in the years ahead, and especially as we plan our new learning village. So one of the things that we're really encouraging guests to do is when they come to the garden, share their stories, share their photos, share their experience. And we're also trying to encourage people to think of the garden, not just during Garden Fest when a lot of people do come to the garden, but we're trying to encourage the residents of the region to think of our garden during all seasons. So there's something to experience here in autumn. There's something to experience here in February. There's something to experience here in spring, and certainly during the summer. And that's why we're really looking at how we can amplify our programming throughout the year. So right now, of course, the garden is regionally famous for our holiday light display, but we're trying to think about what can we do in February, what can we do in October to ensure that our residents in the community realize the importance and relevance of our garden to them at that time too. And that way, if we have a really bad, wet, snowy holiday display, we're not as dependent on that revenue, and we have those shoulder seasons to rely on. So with that, I would just like to share that, I know the Hahn Horticulture Garden is reliant tremendously on their volunteers. Very similarly, Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden, the success of the garden is dependent on our volunteer corps. Before the pandemic, we had about 600 volunteers, and we've invited about 250, close to 300 of those volunteers back. But as those volunteers continue to get vaccinated and as our programs begin to ramp up, we're looking forward to welcoming more volunteers back. So, we're still a garden that is evolving and weathering this past year. But I'm very excited for the future of the garden. We have a great team here. We have a great strategic plan. We have a great master plan, and there's great vision. And so we're looking forward to being even more accessible to our community and to being more resilient and relevant for our community. So with that, I'll entertain any questions that anyone might have.
Okay, great. It's exciting to hear that you guys are plotting some major expansions. That's going to be very interesting to watch. So there were a couple questions. One you kind of answered already. Somebody was asking how large the garden is. So it sounds like there's places that are accessible and places that aren't.
Yep. So, Scott, the quick and easy answer to how large the garden is, the main garden, Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden, is about 80 acres. About 50 of those acres are accessible to guests. And the Lewis Ginter Nature Reserve, which is our satellite campus, if you will, at this point, is just under 80 acres. And right now, since that is still a private residence, it's not as accessible. So Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden and the Nature Reserve total were about 160 acres.
Okay. Are you doing any private tours of the reserve, or is that just going to be open once the family's no longer there?
Sure. We have been doing some private tours of the garden, and pre-COVID, those were happening in the spring, especially during the peak azalea bloom. And then we had some tours out there in the autumn as well, because it is a gorgeous setting there in Hanover County. So we are starting to slowly bring some of those tours back on. And so as we are monitoring the CDC guidelines and the regulations put forth by the governor, we hope to be bringing those back. Really important to note that the residents there, the Cosby family, both Father Roy and Elizabeth, are in their mid to upper 90s at this point. And so we're really trying to protect their health with any tours, and even our team going out there.
No, completely understandable. So what do you consider the gems of the garden that make it a special destination?
Yes, so that's a great question. And I'll say, I had just changed jobs when I left Longwood before I came here, and really was not looking to make a move. I wasn't putting applications out there or anything. And then when I was considering applying for this role, the gems of the garden are the team, the staff, the reputation of the staff here, the tenure of the staff that are here. That's certainly one of the gems. I think another certainly is the age of the garden. When you think of a lot of public gardens, especially cultural nonprofit public gardens that aren't affiliated with the university, many of them are old, over 100 years old or 80, 90 years old. And so Lewis Ginter is young, with only about 40 years old. And so there's so much opportunity for growth, so much opportunity for reimagining the spaces. And because a portion of the property, about 30 acres, are not really developed, just that opportunity for expansion and envisioning how guests will use this for the future. As far as places to visit in the garden and individual gardens within Lewis Ginter Botanical Garden, one of my favorite places is the Island Garden. And that's really close to the Robbins Tea House. And the Island Garden is a series of pathways over water, and it's just surrounded by native plants, and especially pitcher plants and bog plants. So that's one of my favorite places. Another favorite place of mine is in the conservatory. And there's a little area where we just celebrate succulents, so cacti and agaves and all different kinds of succulents. So those are some of the gems of the garden.
What zone are you guys in?
Isn't that debatable these days? I think we get a lot of questions around that. I'd say probably a 7B.
Okay. Another question, is Lewis Ginter a nonprofit or affiliated with an educational institution?
Yep. So we are our own 501c3 nonprofit. So we're not affiliated with any university or other organization. Interestingly, though, I will share, Scott, that for those, and I didn't go into the history of the garden to any detail because I really kind of focused on what's new and what's coming up this year. But originally, the name Lewis Ginter came from a gentleman who was an entrepreneur, a businessman here in Richmond, and he had transplanted to Richmond from New York, and he bought the property where the garden currently is situated, and built a wheelhouse here. So a wheelhouse where some of the affluent folks from downtown Richmond would bicycle to then, at the time, Lewis Ginter, which was in the country. Now, if you think about where we are in respect to downtown, we're not much in the country anymore, but this was kind of a reprieve for people to leave the city, come out to the country, bicycle, have some fun at the lake. And when Mr. Ginter passed away, he left this property to his niece, Grace Arentz. And she lived here. Well, she built a small little hospital here. She added on to the wheelhouse that was here, and had a home for convalescent children. And that lasted for a few years, and then she resided here. And when she passed away, she gave the land to the city of Richmond for them to develop the botanical garden in her uncle's name. So for several decades, the city didn't act on that. And so in the 80s is when the garden really started to take shape and to be realized.
Interesting. So another question came in, I was asking about handicap accessibility and how accessible the gardens are.
Sure. So we have accessibility throughout the gardens. Our pathways are mixed, but most of the pathways are paved and easily accessible by wheelchair, or if you have a scooter for families that might have strollers. Just about every pathway is accessible. Even the treehouse, we have access in that way. So the conservatory, almost every garden, there are some pathways where there's some steps. And so you would have to kind of turn back around and exit a different way. But we are trying to be as accessible as possible to everyone. And certainly the demographic of our visitors is skewed to seniors, retirees. And so we're really cognizant of that.
Okay, great. Trying to see, it looks like that's kind of addressed all the questions. Are there any other questions while we have Brian on the line? So do you guys have a timeline for when you're going to start making some of these improvements that you're talking about?
Sure. So the capital campaign that I referenced earlier is not public yet. We have started fundraising already, and we have received some significant contributions to that capital campaign. We are ambitious in that we hope to break ground in 2023. So we're excited. You know, the plans would allow us to double the square footage of our conservatory. It would allow us to expand the footprint of the gardens and the access of the gardens to our guests tremendously. So this is a big step for us, and we're really excited for it. And so we're hoping that the campaign will go public maybe as early as this summer.
Okay. Getting back to the history, somebody says, what was or is a wheelhouse?
Yeah, so a wheelhouse is, and as that's their term that they use, not necessarily mine. It was a bicycle club. So it was a place where people would bicycle, they would park their bikes, they would have socialization, they would drink, be merry. But it was a place where people would bicycle. And at the time, Mr. Ginter even had a rail car that would come out this way. So even if you didn't have a bike, you would still be able to come out and enjoy the lake and to socialize and get out of the city. So Wheelhouse is just the name of the house, named after the purpose, which was a place for bicyclists to convene.
Okay. And then one last question to either of us. Which are the best gardens to see in Virginia? So obviously you all are on that list. What else would you add to that list?
Sure, that's a hard question. I would say, well, obviously Lewis Ginter, as you mentioned, we've been ranked within the top 10 botanic gardens in the country. So definitely we're one of the best. Norfolk Botanic Garden is awesome. If anybody's ever been to Norfolk Botanical Garden, they have a beautiful light display. They have a great collection of azaleas, and they do a great job there. One of my favorites, honestly, is Dumbarton Oaks. I'm not sure if anybody's ever been to Dumbarton Oaks in the DC area, but that's a great one. So those would probably be my top three. The Hahn Horticulture Garden, I mean, come on, you can't leave that one out.
Yeah, we're a little small slice of heaven. Yeah. So one more question that did pop up is, do y'all have any major insects that you have to control?
Gosh, we're always, insects are a constant problem within any garden. I think that we're monitoring for emerald ash borer. In the heat of the summer, definitely Japanese beetle. There's probably some things I'm not even thinking of right now. I can't think of the insect that eats back the hibiscus right now. Help me out, Scott, on that one. It's a little
My wheelhouse. So
yeah, I mean, we try to be as sustainable as possible. We only spray when we absolutely have to. mainly because of the cost, and we're trying to be good stewards of the environment. But certainly Japanese beetle, we're monitoring for emerald ash borer, and I think it's a type of leaf hopper that it just tears up the hibiscus, and I can't think of what it is right now. Maybe someone in the chat can help me out on that. If you watched Virginia Homegrown last night, I was on, and I fielded a lot of questions on the fly, and I think I used all my on the spontaneity up last night.
Okay, and then one more question came up. Could you talk a little bit more about the rose gardens you have there?
Sure. So the Rose Garden is one of the newer gardens within Lewis Ginter, and we try to have a good selection of roses, from hybrid teas to some of the newer germplasm out that tend to be more resistant to powdery mildew and even some of the insects. I can't remember the number of roses that are there, but they've been selected to ensure that we have good color, starting from the roses have already started blooming down there. They started blooming about a couple weeks ago, and will bloom throughout the entire summer. And we have to do that because it is an important venue for us for event rentals. And it's also a core part of the garden. It's in the center of the garden. So we want that space to be beautiful all the time. And the roses are planted around a pergola structure. There's a lot of access there. And directly across from our rose garden is our Robin's Tea House. And so this year, because of the pandemic, the tea house, which used to be a formal kind of sit down, plated, served dinner or served lunch, we've turned that into more of a cafe. And so the Rose Garden right now has been a central place within Lewis Ginter where our guests will picnic, if you will. So they'll have their meals in and around the Rose Garden. The Rose Garden also has a great overlook of our Sydnor Lake. So great view sheds there. We do have to do some spray applications there on occasion, but we do have quite a bit of diversity as far as types of roses that are displayed there, from climbers, hybrid teas, and we don't really have many tree roses, and then some of the newer germplasm that's been out for pest and disease resistance.
Okay, great. So I think that's about it for the questions. Once again, thank you, Brian, for taking the time to meet with us today. We appreciate it. Hopefully everybody will be able to come visit you in person soon. For those of you who are wondering when the next talk is, it's Wednesday, May 12th, and we're going to go up to Wisconsin, to the Wisconsin Arboretum, with another Hokie graduate, David Stevens, will be in the talk that day. So thanks again, Brian. And
absolutely.
All right,
thank you for having me. It's good to see everyone.
Yes.
All right. Bye now.
Bye.